Hello everyone, welcome back to the series of Introduction to Salesforce Comms Cloud Code. In the last video, we talked about the third-party integration, and in this video, we'll be covering the Open Commerce APIs, also known as OCAPIs. So far, we have seen be it the Salesforce reference architecture or the site genesis, the support for every single functionality or the content has been provided just for the websites. For instance, if we talk about the products, the content assets, slots, libraries, registration, checkout, all the functionalities are also supported only on the websites. Even in the code, we have seen there are some out-of-the-box APIs that we refer to in order to fetch the details. But it is quite possible that external system also want to access the same information. For instance, if I want to have a mobile application supporting the same functionality that we have on the website, and in the background we want that to be using the Salesforce, but on top the technology could be anything else. So for instance, if I want to list in my mobile application, if I want to list all the products the same way it is being listed on the web applications, so the PLP listing should be the same as what we have on the website. Similarly, if I want to open any of the PDPs and I want the customers to be able to select the size, width, quantity, they should be able to see the promotions, add the product to the cart, and rest of the checkout. So in that case as well, keeping the base system same, we want all the transactions and everything to be happening in the Salesforce, but the mobile application will be entirely a different integration or a different platform that it could be on. So in order to make sure that the external system are also able to access the information on the resources, Salesforce has, in layman terms, we can say all the APIs that we're using in the code. So out of the box API have been exposed in terms of Open Commerce API. And before we start with the Open Commerce API, so first thing that you can do is you can just go through the documentation provided by Salesforce. I'll attach this link in the video description as well, so you can go through it over there. So before we start with the OCAPI implementation and the hands-on, we need to understand there are a couple of prerequisites and a couple of things that we need to gather before we start the implementation. And even before that, we need to understand how many types of OCAPIs are created and what are the use of those OCAPIs, so that based on the functionality or based on the feature that we want to introduce, we can define, or we should be able to decide which API should we go with. So primarily OCAPI is basically of three different kind. First is the shop API. So any information which is available publicly on the website, be it for the guest user or the registered users. So for instance, the customer is able to look at the libraries, products, promotions, and everything, single data which is publicly available. So it's more of the storefront behavior that you want to achieve with the help of API. So that can be done with the help of shop APIs. On the other hand, if you're talking about updating the existing attributes, so for instance, if I want to update the product values, product name, description, anything related to product, or it could be related to categories, setting the category rules, promotions. So anything that needs a transaction to be done with the Salesforce server, that can be done with the help of data APIs. And the meta API is basically providing a formal description of the OCAPI that you are trying to understand. So these are the primarily three types of OCAPIs. So it makes us, it helps us understand which particular API should be used. For instance, if I'm talking about the mobile application and I want to use the OCAPI to display the product information on the PDPs on mobile app. So in that case, since the PDP information is something which is more towards the storefront side and it's available publicly, so we'll be going with the shop API. But on the other hand, if I want to update the name of that product, so that will be more of a transaction that we have to do with the Salesforce server. So that will be going into the data API. So now we know that how many types of APIs we have. So when we are starting with the implementation, we need to make sure there are certain other prerequisites are also, and we do have all the information that's needed. You can go through this documentation and you can check it out. So it says that there are different methods being supported by different endpoints, be it your get, post, patch, delete, update. And accordingly, they have different statuses as well that we can use to put in the code. You can put checks based on the statuses, whether it's 200, 401 or what all. But one thing which is mandatory is the client ID. So client ID is more of a mechanism for Salesforce to understand that this request, whatever request is coming to the server, it's coming or originating from a genuine source. in order to create the client ID, you need to have an access. You need to have access to your account manager. So under the account manager, you can go to the API client, and as soon as you click on Add API client, it gives you with this form. In this form, you can provide different details like display name, description, password, confirmation part, and access control. At any time, you can just enable or disable this client ID. Accordingly, you will have to provide the organization as well. It could be possible that your account manager or your account has access to multiple organizations, and you want any particular client ID to be providing authorization for any specific organization that can be done. Accordingly, you'll have to set the rules as well, and there are certain other optional parameters as well, which for the basic use are not mandatory, but down the line, if we talk about some complex implementations, for instance, if we talk about updating the SSL certificates on staging instance, so in that case, we need to make sure that the default scope and the allowed scopes, these values are also filled. We will be covering the optional parameters as and when we'll be coming across different functionalities or different features that you want to develop with the help of OCAPI. But for now, for the initial implementation, we should be good with the display name and the password and confirm password fields. As soon as you save it, we finally get back to the API client screen, in which you can see. So the API client ID is basically something which is automatically generated, and the password that we have provided, you just make sure that you remember that password, because this is more of a username password authentication system that the API uses. We'll shortly come to know about the use of this particular client ID and the password combination. But once you have created the API client ID, and one more thing which is important is the API client IDs are primarily needed when you are talking about the integration with the PIG. So PIG is basically primary instance group, which consists of your development, staging, and production environment. But when we are talking about the SIGs or the secondary instance groups, your local sandboxes or the on-demand sandboxes, for SIG instances, we can use a constant value for the API client ID, and it has not to be generated. So let's get back and let's start with a very basic example of creating a PDP for a mobile application. Since we already discussed that will be a shop product API. So let's search for the shop product. And under the shop product, you can find different endpoints are also available. Based on the requirement, you can decide which endpoint to go with. So for instance, we'll be starting with the get single product endpoint here. And let's go to Postman. I'll create a new collection here, test. Let's name it test OCAPI. And inside it, let's create a request. The type of the request would be get. And since we are using the shop API product fetch, let's name it that. Okay, so the URL that we have. Now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to access this product ID. So we'll just replace the product ID with the ID that we have got. Now, still there are two parameters that need to be updated. First is the hostname and the other the site ID. The site ID will be the reference architecture site ID that we're using. And the hostname will be the hostname of your sandbox. So for SIGs, the hostname is primarily the ID of, the base URL of the sandbox that you're using. But for the production instance or staging or development, the PIG instances, we have to make sure that we are putting the actual URLs. So actual URLs is something, so embedded CDN URLs that we have to put. And if we cannot use the default sandbox URL in case of PIG instances, because the origin shielding has been put. Previously we were able to do it, but nowadays you have to use a vanity hostname that you could be used to. So for now we'll just start with the base hostname that we have for the sandbox, because we are on the SIG instance right now. So and for the site ID as well, we'll be using the ref arg that we are trying to access with this OCAPI. I've already created the environment variables here, so I can quickly show it to you. We have the username, hostname, and the password. Site ID remains the reference architecture, and the client ID, as I mentioned, for the SIG instances, we don't need to create the client ID. The sample value for the client ID for the SIGs is a 30 character long string with each and every character being A. So this is the sample client ID that we have, and the token, we will quickly talk about the token. For now, we can just skip it. Now we have this URL ready, and one thing that we initially discussed was that we need to create the client ID. So far we haven't passed the client ID in the URL, so that has to be part of the parameters. So in the parameters we'll be passing the client ID like this, and let's send this request. As soon as we send, it says the client access forbidden exception. Now what is happening is, we do have the URL and the additional parameters that we are supposed to send, but the sandbox is not accepting this request because it is by default the rules that are sent on the sandboxes are that any request that comes to you, you have to just reject it. Now in order to make sure that it works on a concept of, we can say in layman terms, you can say it works on a concept of whitelisting. So we need to whitelist this particular client ID, and we need to make sandbox available and aware of the fact that okay, this is the endpoint that we are trying to access with this client ID, and this is the operation that we are trying to do. So that is the get method that we are trying to do here. So in order to do that, we have to go to administration and search for the open commerce API settings that you can find under the site development here. Now here you can see there are two different types. Select type would be either shop and data, and similarly the context could be either global or it could be any value. Or so it could be possible that the sandbox that you are using, it may be having multiple websites. Now when we are talking about the context as global, whatever value that we are setting in the global context, that will be applicable for all the websites. But it is quite possible that for any specific website you want to allow some client ID to do certain actions, but for the other website I don't want to do it. So that can also be done. In that case, we need to make sure the whatever configurations that we are setting, we have to make that site specific. For simplicity, let's start with the reference architecture. So since we are working with the reference architecture site, we'll select the context as the reference arc. And since the request that we are trying to make here, in the URL as well, we can see the request type or the API type that we are trying to get the data from the shop. So under the shop itself, we'll update the value and the configurations here. First thing that we have to put is the version details. So for instance, right now the latest version that we have is the 24.5, that you can see in the API response as well. Here the version is 24.5. This version does not have any impact on the response that you get. It's more of a parameter that we have to send to make the system aware of the fact that okay, this is the version that we are trying to have this OCAPI conversation on. Second thing that we need to provide is the clients. So this clients is nothing but the client ID that we have created in the account manager. Now it could be possible that the type of this value will be an array. So it is quite possible that for reference architecture, I might have created different clients based on, now consider this as a system in which we are connected with multiple external systems. So one of them being the mobile application for which we are trying to create a PDP. There could be other system as well which is trying to push some data into the system, or they are trying to fetch some other sort of detail. In that case, we can have multiple clients, and each and every client will be having a certain level of access. So we have to define the access level as well. So first thing that is in the clients array that we have to provide is the client ID. And the client ID is the same as what we're using in this case. I'll just simply copy the value here. Now we have this client ID. What we are doing is we are telling this our business manager that for this particular client ID, I want certain resources to be available. And what are the resources? So that we have to provide in this next attribute, which is called the resources. And this resources is again an array. And then this inside the resources, you can provide the values like what will be the resource ID. Since the same client can access different kind of resources, so for now we are accessing only the products. let's get back to the URL, and the URL is in this format. So let's mention that. Now, one more thing is that in the resource ID we can provide wildcards as well. So instead of ID, I can simply specify star value here. What it does is, so if you go back to the documentation, you'll find there are different endpoints as well. So if I go for get product images, I can see the product, then ID, then images. Similarly, if we talk about the availability, then it says the products, then the ID of that product, and what is the availability that can be fetched. So to avoid the rest of the endpoints, like after ID, I can provide any other values as well. You can use, you can simply use this wildcard star. Once you have provided the resource ID, then you have to define what all methods you want this particular endpoints to be accepting. Again, this will be an array. For now, we are just going with the get option. And the last attribute would be what we want to do with the attributes, and what all attributes you want this ID to be able to access. So for read attributes, we'll simply put star. That means we want this client ID to be able to access all the product related attributes. This is complete. Let's save it and okay, underscore v. This is read attributes. Okay, this is saved now. Now, as soon as we go back to the Postman and try to hit the request returns with this value, where you can see the ID of the product, long description, name, page description, page title, and all these things. And so on the PDP, we can see all the details here. So let's say if I search for this long description, I should be able to find it on the PDP as well. Yeah, so it is part of your description as well as your details. Yeah. Similarly, for the name as well, you can search and we'll accordingly find that okay, the correct values are being coming here. Second thing is like the price that we can see here, but it's not part of the response that we're getting. So you can just simply expand the results. And if I want to include the prices as well, I'll just include the expand attribute and say the prices should also be part of this response. And here you can see the prices are coming to 99.99, which is okay, maybe this, okay, get 20% off on this tie. This seems to be a product. Okay, it could be possible that some promotion is being applied and after that the prices are being slashed to 239.99, but the actual price, the list price of the product is 299.99 only. Okay, so this is how we can access the detail of the products. It's our goal. So I'm just trying to make sure that there's the same product that we're trying to access. And here you can see the values that are associated with this product. Now let's talk about updating some of the attribute for this product. For instance, let's say if I want to update the name of this product, in that case, since this is a transaction that we need to do on the server, so that cannot be done with the help of a shop API. It has to be a data API for sure. Now let's create one more and let's add one more request, which will be of type data product update. And in the documentation, we can search for data product. And here you can see, what's that? Yeah. Under the endpoints, you can say, see update product is an option. And this request type will be of patch. So it will simply select patch, and after that you can provide the URL here. ID, again, we'll keep the same ID of the product that we have used here. And the host will be again the host that we have provided in the last example. Okay, now what other parameters are needed in this request? We can find that under the security option here. Yeah, so again it says the client ID has to be passed. So again we'll go to the params. This is the client ID, and since it's a transaction, so we need to authorize first, and after that we should be able to create the entry in the system. But let's try without authentication for now. If I make a request here, it says the authorization header missing exception, so that means the authorization has to be done before. Now the second thing that we need to do is we have to generate a token. Here you can see OAuth 2 application and client ID password the account manager. So we need a token to be generated, and the access token URI you can see here. This is a token URI. So I'll create a new request here to generate the token first. And so this is basically OAuth 2 token. We will need a business manager token, so this is not the correct URL for that. The correct URL will be HTTPS. Then since we have the host value that goes after that, we have DW. Yeah, exactly. This is the correct URL for the auth token, in which we have to provide the client ID, because this is the ID based on which we are doing the authentication. And under the authorization we have to provide the username password. So this will be the basic authentication with the username, and then comes the password value, and the password format will be like, so username is the name, the username that we are using to access the business manager. Similarly, the password will be the password that you try to access the business manager. And after that you have to provide the password for the client ID that we created when we were generating the client ID in the initial stage in the account manager. So the password will be the password for the BM separated value, and after that the password that you have used for the client ID. And since we are using the SIG instance, we can use the same value as the client ID here. And this is the authorization header, and after that we need to provide the grant type as well in the body. So that will be of form URL encoded, and the attribute is something like grant underscore type, and the value goes like URN and colon demandware, then params, then OAuth, grant type, client ID, and then demandware SID, and demandware secure token. So this is basically the grant type that we have to pass. And as soon as you send the request, okay, it has to be type post. As soon as you are in the one with params. Okay, So grant type grant hyphen type and client hyphen ID you have to provide. You cannot provide underscore values. As soon as we do it, we have the access token here. Now this is the token that we have to use in the data request. So under the authorization, we have to provide the bearer token value, and this is the token that I was talking about earlier. So in the token, let's save this value here. Now as soon as I make a request, it says client access forbidden exception. Reason being, we haven't yet set the data tab for reference architecture website in the business manager. So if I go to, I'll just copy this value. If I go to data, this is empty. So we have all the request parameters and everything, but the business manager is not able to, since we have not yet whitelisted the values, it is not able to authorize it. So now what you have to do is, we'll just keep it the same because we are still using the same resource. After products, we have update values. The method is, instead of get, this method will be patch. There's no read attributes right now, so we have to put the write attributes because we want to allow any attribute that is coming to be written. And let's save it. Now if we go back to the Postman collection, we see that we have URL parameter, but we haven't provided the name of this attribute what we want it to be. So since we want to update the name of the product, let's put a value here. Just set test product OCAPI, and as soon as you send it, okay, current site it says, so we have to provide the scope site as well. Organization specific. Okay, one more thing is, since product data is something which is available across, so it depends on the kind of setup that you have. If you have a single master catalog, in that case, and the product is being owned by the master catalog, in that case it is something which will affect the whole organization, and it's not site specific at all. So we need to provide the entry for the global organization wide, and the same value we have to provide over there, because site specific updates will not be accepted. Reason being, it's a global data. So I have provided the value here, and let's replace the site ID again with the hyphen that we used earlier. Read access to patches isn't allowed for the current client. I'll just put the get first, and after that we can patch. What's wrong with this? Okay, accordingly we'll have to provide the read attribute access as well. Let's try it now. Okay, so this seems, so we've got this 200 OK status update, and let's try to refresh the PDB now. Yeah, the product name has updated now as test product OCAPI. So basically data API has been used to update the name of the product, while the shop API had been used to fetch the details of it. Now since we know that how these endpoints are exposed and how we can make use of them in the code, if you want to create some OCAPI extensions, and if you want to use it, so that we can do with in a similar fashion that we did for the third-party integrations. So again, in the third-party integrations, what we did was we basically created a service helper file, service register service file, in which we have provided so firstly we created the service credentials, in which you can provide this endpoint value, and the parameters is something which we can pass from the code. Authorization header, so first thing that you have to do is you have to generate in case of the shop product fetch, we don't even need to create the token. We can simply use this URL, and in the parameter we can pass the client ID value, and accordingly it will give the response in that we can use. If we are trying to update some values with the help of code in our workspace, basically we need to generate the access token first. So for that we can use the same URL, and as a body parameter we can pass the grant type, and accordingly it will generate the token that we can use for the subsequent requests for the data updates. So since we have already covered the third-party integration, we can use the same mechanism to integrate the OCAPI with the system. And there are certain other values and certain other methods as well provided by Salesforce when we are talking about OCAPI. For instance, when you are trying to hit this endpoint, we want certain functionality to happen first, and after that we want the product name to be updated. For instance, when I'm trying to update the name of the product, I want there to be a function that will check all of the request parameters that we are getting. So for instance, the name is coming as test product OCAPI, and since the name contains test, I want a code to be written that will make sure that if the name contains test, I want this test to be replaced with the live product OCAPI, I would say. So that is something that I want the system to perform before this the OCAPI hits the server and before the execution of the actual OCAPI happens. Accordingly, we can also do after post or after patch. So there are different functions provided and exposed by OCAPI. These you can refer to them as hooks. So these are called the OCAPI hooks, with that we'll be covering in the next video. But in this the OCAPI discussion, if you guys have any questions or concerns, please reach out over sfcc.queries@gmail.com, or you can post your comments or questions on the videos as well.